Hello everyone, it's Mafalda and welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you my best books of 2021. Finally, I have come up with a list. It wasn't easy because I've read a lot of books this year and a lot of great books as well. This list was really hard to come up with because when I started looking at all the books that I read this year and I started picking my favorites, I realized that I was picking all the same type of books in the same genre. I was mostly picking contemporary books because those are my favorites and I give a lot of them 5 stars and it's the genre that I read the most. And I felt like the list was becoming too repetitive and I was always mentioning the same types of books and I didn't want to do that, so I decided to do something kind of similar to what I did last year, and I picked my favorite books of each genre that I read the most from. So yeah, I'm going to be showing you my favorite YA contemporary, my favorite adult general fiction, my favorite nonfiction, my favorite fantasy, my favorite historical fiction, and I think that's it. The only exception that I have here is for YA contemporaries, I tried to only pick one, but it was really hard, so I picked 4. I swear, I really tried, and then I was like, oh, I'm gonna pick 3, and then I was like, oh, but I have to mention this one along with this one, and yeah, so I have 4 YA contemporaries, and then I have one for the other genres. And before I start, I just want to say, the lighting is very bright because I'm filming this super early in the day, so I normally don't film at this hour, so I hope the lighting isn't too bad. But yeah, let's get started with my favorite books and best books I read in 2021. Also, I want to say that I'm terrible at talking about books that I love. I'm always like, oh, I love them because they're great, and that's it. So this is going to be a very underwhelming video, I feel like, because it's just gonna be me raving about a book and just not saying anything coherent. I'm gonna try my best though, so yeah, let's get started. So first I'm going to talk about my favorite YA contemporaries. I have 4 books that I want to mention here. So the first one is one that I've mentioned a couple of times on my channel and on my bookstagram and everything, because this book just means a lot to me personally because of the themes that it approaches and the main character and everything, and that's Perfect on Paper by Sophie Gonzalez. This is a book basically about bisexuality, and that really resonates with me, obviously. I really wish I had a book like this growing up because I feel like it would have made me come to terms with myself a lot easier and faster, and yeah, this book was just everything I needed. And if you don't know the plot of this book, if you haven't heard me talk about it, this book follows our main character Darcy Phillips, and she runs a relationship advice business at her school through a locker, and no one knows it's really her behind that locker thing situation. And then one day she's collecting the letters from that locker so she can respond and give people help, and a guy is there and sees her, and his name is Alexander, and basically they strike a deal, and he doesn't tell anyone that it's her behind the locker, and she helps him get back with his ex, and it's a really fun book. I really love all the discussions about bisexuality and just relationships in general, and I really loved all the characters, and I just adored reading this book. And like I said, I wish I had this book growing up. It just would have helped me so much. So yeah, that was my first favorite of the year. Then the next YA contemporary that I wanted to mention, I feel like I mentioned this one in my mid-year book freakout tag, I think, as one of my favorites of the year, and it was Girl Made of Stars by Ashley Herring Blake. I finally read this book after everyone else reading it. I'm literally the last person to read this book, and it really lived up to the hype. This book made me cry, it made me question my everything, my life, and I just adored this book. I read it in a day. I was just so hooked to this book and the story and the characters. I loved it. And this book is about 2 twins, Mara and Owen, and one day Owen is accused of raping one of Mara's friends, and basically Mara is kind of should I believe my brother? Should I believe my friend? And she's thrown into this really difficult situation. And yeah, this was a really powerful book about sexual assault, obviously, and also our main character is bisexual, and there's, I think, a non-binary character. Do I remember that correctly? I think so. And I love the representation, first of all, and I just really love the discussion about sexual assault and accountability in this book. I just loved how it approached the topic, because obviously we're in Mara's shoes and we're like, should I trust my brother who's like my best friend even though he did this terrible thing to my friend? Like, it's a really hard situation to be in. This was a really powerful book. I was crying by the end and I just loved everything about it. Like, I can understand the hype because like a few years ago everyone was talking about this book, and yeah, finally picked it up and finally loved it, and I am so excited to read more by Ashley Herring Blake because I haven't read anything by her other than this. This really got me excited for all of her backlist in her newest book that is coming out next year. Yeah. And on the next two books, I'm going to mention them like together because I realized with these two books that I really love something in books. I basically realized that trope that I really love in books because of these two, and one of them I read at the beginning of the year in January and the other one I read in December, so it was really funny that I started and ended with these books, and I just realized they have like a common link that I absolutely adore. So the first one is one that I've mentioned already on my channel a lot, and it was Dig by A.S. King. Like, I've been raving about this book ever since the beginning of the year because I read it in like the first few weeks and I was like, oh my god, new favorite, like an instant 5-star. And this is a really weird book, and I read two of A.S. King's books this year and I realized that's just her writing style. And this is a really weird book, and I get that it's not for everyone, but what I really loved about this book, other than the discussions about racism and white privilege that are brought up in this book that I really adored, I also really liked something that is also in my next book. And that next book that I read in December is The Wicker King by Kay Ingram. Like, these two books are very different, but also I noticed that they have something similar, which is basically you're kind of confused throughout the whole book, and it's a really weird book all throughout it. But then at the end, both of these books have like a logical explanation for all of the weirdness in the book. I guess it's really hard to explain. You have to read the books to like really understand what I'm saying, but I really like that. Like, I like when a book is like kind of like magical realism and it has fantastical elements in the book. At the end of these two books, you realize that all the fantastic and weird elements of the story can be explained logically, and that's something that I realized that I really enjoy in books, because I feel like I always struggle with magical realism books, and these two are kind of like magical realism until proven otherwise at the end. I'm trying not to give the endings of these books away. But yeah, I just love being confused for most of the book, and then at the end it's just like, oh, but it's this. And I'm like, oh, okay, that makes total sense and I love it. So yeah, I love these two books. Also, The Wicker King, I didn't really explain the book, but it's about two best friends called, what are their names? Called August and Jack, and they're best friends. They have been since they were little and they're really close. And then one day Jack just starts like seeing things in the real world and he starts like having kind of hallucinations, and August is the only one that can like ground him and like actually help him. And it's a really good story. I really loved this book. This was probably one of my favorites of the like later half of the year, and yeah, I just really adored this book. I really want to check out more of Kay Ingram's work. Just had to mention these two books at the same time because I just couldn't mention one and not the other, and they're kind of similar in my head. Maybe I'm just imagining things, but I feel like they kind of have the similar style of writing and book, and yeah, I really loved both of them, so yeah. Now moving on to another genre that I want to highlight because I feel like I wasn't going to have a favorite for this genre, but this book really surprised me this year because a lot of people love it, but I was like, oh, maybe I'm not gonna like it that much. And it was The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I was so surprised by how much I liked this book. This could have been in my most surprising books of 2021 because it was just like, I don't know, like a lot of people love it, but I was just like, maybe it's not for me. Classics are usually like a 3 or a 4-star for me. And to me, a good classic makes me feel like I'm not reading a classic, because when you're reading a classic, most of the times it's just like boring and the writing is really difficult to read, and you're just like I feel like I'm not engaged most of the time with classic books. But with this one, I just felt like I was reading something so modern, even though this book was published in like, I don't know, 18 something. With this one, I was just understanding everything in the story somehow, and I really liked the writing and the dialogue between the characters. I already knew the story because I have seen the movie with Ben Barnes, obviously, and also I just knew the story because it's a really popular book and a really popular story, but it still really captivated me even though I already knew what was going to happen and what was going on. But I was really impressed by how easy this was to read, how entertaining it was, and also it's a really short book, so it's really like easy to read. I read it in like a few days, and now I get why people mention this book as like one of their favorites of all time. I love the message in the story, and I just loved how haunting and dark it was. I think I read it during the summer, but this would have been like the perfect book to like kickstart the month of October because it's just a really dark and gothic novel, and I just love the vibes in here. This book really surprised me. It was definitely my favorite classic of the year. Even though I give it like 4 out of 5 stars, it's still a really good rating for a classic for me. So yeah, now moving on to my favorite literary fiction of the year. This was a really hard category to choose a book from because I read a lot of good things this year. I've been reading more and more adult books as the years go by, and I think adult literary fiction is becoming one of my favorite genres. So this was really hard to pick, especially because one of my favorites from this category is already in my most surprising books of 2021. Actually, 2 of them. Detective Ivakoji and Lusser are 2 of my favorite literary fiction books of the year, and I already mentioned them in that video, so I decided to pick something else for this, and the one that I chose was Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. This was such a good book. I kind of already knew that this was going to be a favorite because I just love stories about characters, and I love when the stories about those characters like intertwine between each other, and that is literally what this book is about. It's about 12 different characters and they're all kind of connected somehow, and I just love that type of story for some reason. I don't know why. I also love it in movies. I just adore learning more about characters, and all of these characters are so different from each other. The diversity in this book is crazy, and I just already knew I was going to love it because of that. I think I gave this one 4.5 out of 5 stars, and the reason for that is because the writing of this is really hard to get into. At least it was for me, because it's like, I don't even know how to explain it. It's like the writing is beautiful, but sometimes the sentences are like fragmented into like different lines, and there's not a lot of punctuation in the text, and for that reason it's kind of hard to get into, but once you get into, you're just like flying through it. So that was the only reason why I took it like half a star from the book, because other than that, I loved this book. I loved the story, I love the characters, I love how they all intertwine kind of at the end. This was my first Bernardine Evaristo, and I'm really excited to read more from her because like from this I can gather that she's a genius, I think. This was the winner of the Booker Prize in 2019 and shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2020, and I really get it because it's an excellent piece of work and I really want to reread it for some reason. I don't know why. Also, I had an amazing experience with this book and also the next book that I'm going to mention, because I read both of these books. I don't know if I finished this one in that week, but I read both of these books in my week without social media experiment that I did here on my channel. That was probably one of my best weeks of reading. I read like so many favorites, and yeah, I read this one and I read the next one that I'm going to mention. Good segue. And now moving on to nonfiction, and this is probably the book that I would choose if I had to choose one favorite book of 2021. This book just like changed my life, I feel like, and it instantly made my top favorite books of all time list that I don't even have, but now I have because I just want to put this book in there. And it was Know My Name by Chanel Miller. I read this book also in my week without social media experiment, and wow, like I just have no words to describe this book. This was one of the best books I've read in the last few years. It was amazing, excellent, 5 stars instantly. Like, I kind of wanted to give this book 5.5 out of 5 stars because it's just that good. Like, the writing in this, oh my god, it's so beautiful. The story is obviously really hard to read and impactful, but also super important, and Chanel Miller is a powerhouse and just like one of my biggest inspirations now. I just love her so much. This book just like I have no words, like I literally have no words to describe this book. I was just flying through this book. This is not an easy book to read, first of all, and it's also like really big. Like it doesn't look like it, but the font is really small. But I was just like flying through this book. I didn't want it to put it down. It was just that good. Her writing is so amazing, and just the way she tells the story is so impactful, and you really feel for her. I just want to say, obviously, trigger warnings for sexual assault in this book, like heavy trigger warnings. It goes into detail and everything. So yeah, this is a really hard book to read, but one of the best books that I've ever read in my life, and I'm so glad that I read it during the week that I did, because I just wasn't distracted by social media and I was just like so absorbed into the story, and I feel like it was the best moment to read this book ever. And yeah, I just have really good memories of reading this book and loving it and crying and laughing and just like everything. So yeah, this is probably my favorite book of 2021, one of my favorite books of all time now, and I get the hype of this book, like a lot of people love it, so yeah. Now moving on to historical fiction, I obviously reread The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo this year, and I could have picked that one for this genre again, but like that is a reread, so it doesn't count. So still, it was so easy to choose this book, and it was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. She always gets... I read this for the 2017 book club that I host with Casey, and it was just like... I was really scared to read this book because I read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. It's probably one of my favorite books, if not my favorite book of all time. It just means so much to me. I reread it this year because I just love it so much. Then I read Lizzie Jones and the Six when it first came out because I was really excited for it, and it kind of disappointed me. Even though I gave it like a 4-star or something, it was a good book, but at the same time I was kind of annoyed by it, and it just wasn't that thing. And with this one I was really scared because I felt like I was going to get like the same thing because it doesn't live up to the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo hype and how good that book is. So I was really scared to read this book, honestly. This is also one of the books that surprised me the most this year because of how much I loved it. Like, she needs to write about famous people that don't exist for the rest of her life because she does it so well. She makes me believe that these people actually exist, and that is just so amazing. Like, I don't know how she does it, and I just really love this book. Like, this is definitely a second place after The Seven Husbands, and the story is set in the 80s in Malibu, and it follows the 4 children of a famous singer called Mick Riva, and especially follows the main character Nina Riva, who is the oldest of the 4, I think. And it's about their life and their parents and the dynamic between the 4 siblings. And it's also about a party that is going to happen at Nina's house, and that we know from the start that the house will burn down. And oh my god, this was just like such an amazing book. It was such a wild ride. I loved knowing all of the characters. Like, her books kind of feel like soap operas sometimes, but I just love it so much. There's so much intrigue and so much drama, and the characters are so well done and well fleshed out, and oh my god, it was just amazing. I really believed that all of them existed, and I was really impressed by this book. I really was expecting this to be like a 3-star, but it ended up being a 5-star, and I am just so excited to see what she does next. So yeah, this was definitely my favorite historical fiction of the year. I feel like I didn't read a lot of historical fiction, and the ones that I read were kind of like disappointing, so this was definitely my favorite from the get-go, so easy to choose from. And now the last genre that I want to talk about is fantasy, which was also really hard to choose because there were a lot of like okay books, and then I had like 1 or 2 that I gave 5 stars to, but at the same time, now looking back at them, I'm like, is it a 5-star? I don't know anymore. And this is definitely one that I think about because it's like I loved this book when I read it. I was crying at the end and everything, but at the same time, now looking back at the book, I don't remember like half of it, so that's not good, you know? But I'm still gonna mention it as like one of my favorites because I read it so fast. It really was a wild ride and I was so invested in the story. And it was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V. Schwab. Everyone was hyping this book up when it came out. I read it a couple of months later, and that's when like people were already giving it bad ratings and saying that the book was shit. And I was really like, oh my god, am I gonna like it or not? And I ended up loving it. I don't get why people hate this book. I really don't, because I really enjoyed it. Like I'm saying, I don't remember half of it, which is not good because I read it in like March or April or something, so I should remember still, but like I just don't, which is weird. But I remember that I really enjoyed it, and I remember that I really liked the way that it was told, and I really liked the ending, which people really criticize. And this book is following Addie LaRue, who is a girl in France in like the 1600s or something. And one day she strikes up a deal with the devil so that she can live forever, but no one can remember her. And so basically Addie LaRue lives her whole life with like people not remembering her, like people turn her back and forget about who she was. And then one day she meets a guy, I think named Henry, and Henry for the first time actually remembers her after he meets her, and Addie's like, what the hell is going on? Why is this happening? And yeah, they try to find why is this happening and why Henry finally remembers her. I was really impressed by this book. I really enjoyed it, and I love the character of Addie and Henry, and I love the like little twists all throughout the book. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this book. I feel like I need to reread it because I don't remember it anymore. Like I said, I had other books that I could mention that were definitely favorites, but they were all falling under the same genre, so I decided to like branch out and give you different genres and different favorites. So yeah, those are the ones that I picked for best books of 2021. Let me know down below if you have any like similar favorites to mine. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe down below if you haven't, and I will see you on my next one. Bye!